down into the enclosure. I'll orient you. This is ground level right here. So we're down ground level. And what you're seeing, these are the tops of the columns of the Hathor temple, and the floor is still 30 feet below the ground level. So they haven't excavated down. We're standing at the tops of the columns. And I just returned a few weeks ago from this very site, and they have not done any more excavation. They are not in any big hurry to excavate this site. So this is what Hathor looks like. Notice the beautifully delicate features of the lips, the eyes, the ears. Absolutely beautiful image. Hathor represented love, the love of oneself, the joy in the love of life. The reason I place these images here for you now is because it's interesting, no matter what temple you go to in Egypt, whether it's the temple of rage, the temple of the warrior within, the temple of light, the temple of darkness, the temples of lust, great temple to be stuck in for 30 years or so. Whatever temple you go into, you will find the image of Hathor, the image of love, outside of those temples, because it is in love that we are asked to know ourselves in rage. In love, we are asked to know the hate within in the past. We are asked to know of the light and the dark, and the jealousy and the lust. In love, we are asking ourselves to have the experience of life. And the Hathor, the energy, the patterns of Hathor at each of those temples to remind us of that. The temples of experience. The initiates thousands of years ago had the luxury of going into a temple and isolating some aspect of their experience and staying in that temple until they had mastered that emotion, staying in that temple for days or weeks or perhaps an entire lifetime. Maybe they were stuck in a particular temple, the temple of love, and the temple of what love and relationships are all about. As they progressed and moved forward through these temples, they would move on to the temples of knowledge and the temples of wisdom prior to their final initiations. Now, the reason I'm saying this to you now is because you and I no longer have the luxury of moving into a temple and isolating some aspect of emotion for years or for a lifetime. We live those temples every day in our lives through our relationships. Relationships are the temples that are allowing us to know ourselves in all ways, to know of the warrior within, to know of our anger and our rage and our joy and our ecstasy. The temples do not have to be painful. And as we redefine pain and fear in our lives, what we find is they are all opportunities. They are opportunities to know ourselves. The temples of knowledge. This is one of the most amazing temples in the Abydos temple complex. The temple of Seti I, just behind and below this temple now, is we're seeing a site that is now being dated at over 22,000 years old. They're dating this, it's empirical evidence, from the layers of Nile flooding, the times that the river has flooded and receded. They've counted at least 22,000 layers covering this temple site. Well, this particular temple, probably one of the oldest in Egypt, is also one of the most amazing. When I was there in 1986, where you see this grass growing, this is a marsh in a swampy area. And what they did was they put this rickety little bridge down here for us so that we could walk across the water and examine the inside of these solid granite walls. And I'm going to go back a slide and point something out to you. Look at how these walls are constructed. Look at this tongue and groove construction of these massive granite blocks weighing 60 and 80 tons apiece. This is unique architecture, not to Egypt alone. We don't see this anywhere else in the world in modern times. And we know that these now, or we're suspecting, these are at least 22,000 years old. Well, as we go down into these temple walls, we find even more of a mystery, perhaps. As you begin to see very specific patterns, geometric patterns, very non-Egyptian, upon these walls, the mystery itself comes from how these were even produced. Not painted, they're not etched, they are literally flash burned with a rapid, intense heat onto solid granite, high quartz walls thousands of years ago. The only technology we have today that would even approach that would be a laser, and a laser probably would not do it because a laser would be so hot, that it would melt the quartz crystals in the granite. And this quartz isn't melted. It's simply scorched. So there's a mystery as to how this pattern has even come about. Well, this pattern of 19 interlocking circles in the science of sacred geometry is now known as the flower of life. It is referenced in the emerald tablets of Thoth that we spoke of earlier, in the texts that were over 13,000 years old. So it wouldn't surprise me if this temple may be over 22,000 years old. Historians don't like those numbers. Geologists have no problem with those numbers at all. So it's interesting to see how these the dating methods and how the history and the sequence is unfolding. Well, this particular pattern is literally a two-dimensional informational system that was left to us through the temples of wisdom. And what may be said about this particular temple is that all that may be known, not experienced, not felt, not emoted, all that may be known in terms of our mathematical world is embodied within the geometric patterns that we see here. In case you couldn't see that well, I put this schematic here for you. What you're seeing are a series of curves, interlocking curves, like the CBS eye, looking like this. Those interlocking curves in the science of sacred geometry represent what is called the vesica Piscis. And what we're saying about the vesica Piscis is that each of those curves represents a male and a female energy in the old terms. In the new terms, we call this electrical and magnetic information in the 20th century idiom. It's the science of the union of opposites. And in the science of sacred geometry, what we say in the flower of life, it was within the inner and the outer walls, these two concentric circles of this pattern. These two concentric circles represent, metaphorically, the inner and the outer wall of the female egg, the female ovum. And what we say is that within those two circles represent all possibilities as potential. Anything can happen through the union of opposites and the way that those unions are allowed, electrical and magnetic energy. This is the temple of wisdom, one of the temples of wisdom that we have in Egypt. As the initiates would move through their lives mastering emotion, the temples of knowledge then would be meaningful to them, just like it is in our lives today. Without the context, without knowing what our lives mean to us, the knowledge is meaningless to us. We would move from the temples of emotion and the temples of knowledge then to the temples of wisdom. This image that you're seeing, the temple of the Sphinx, the temple of the wisdom. This is where the ancient texts tell us that the Hall of Records is actually maintained. The records of human history that resulted from the living of the knowledge, from the wisdom of the knowledge of our cycle from this time back to the last shift of the ages. This is the temple that Edgar Cayce references time and time again. It's interesting, again, I was just in Egypt within the last few weeks. 3 doorways now, 3 passageways have been found that lead into hallways, stairways, and sealed stone and wooden doors leading to some chamber inside of this temple, probably in 1996, as they're estimating now that these doorways will be open. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes about. So the temples of wisdom. You and I live these temples. We're living the identical process to the initiates of old in our lives today. You and I do not have the luxury of going to a temple to isolate, going to a stone building to isolate these aspects of our lives. Our temples have, in fact, become our temples of relationship. This is the way the wisdom comes to us. Now, I've given you a schematic here